Welcome back to our wild backyard. I think you're gonna liken this episode. In this episode, we discuss the Sunburst lichens with Tanner Barnharst. Tanner lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, receiving a BS in microbiology from North Dakota State University and an MS in environmental engineering at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. While in graduate school, Tanner joined the UMN Mycology Club, where he began leading and identifying mushrooms on hikes for club members. Since then, Tanner has been camping, backpacking, and canoeing to find lichens in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Tanner has written 3 lichen guides: the Minnesota Lichen Guide, Common Lichens of the Eastern U.S., and Common Lichens of the Western U.S., which have over 2,000 purchases and downloads. He is the #1 lichen identifier for the United States on iNaturalist and #2 in the world. He was also awarded the President's Volunteer Service Award in 2024 and 2025 for volunteering over 500 hours of service work through the Minnesota Master Naturalist Program. Let's get started at the very beginning. Take us back to our first ever biology class and remind us, what are lichens?
Yeah, so lichens at their most basic are a fungi, like a mushroom, and algae or cyanobacteria, usually known as blue-green algae. So to distill it down, what you really need to know is lichens are fungus plus algae. They need those 2 different organisms living together, and they make these new structures that we see as lichens. And it's because that fungi is growing intimately with that algae and using it for food and energy, they change shapes. And so that's how we get to a lichen.
But today we're specifically talking about that sunburst lichen. So if you were in a room full of lichens, what are the distinguishing characteristics of that sunburst lichen, and how would you pick them out from all the other lichens?
Absolutely. So let's say you're in my spare bedroom, which is filled with lichen samples, and how do we track into sunburst lichen? So the sunburst lichens, they're in the Teleschistaceae family. You don't have to remember that. But the sunburst lichens are all bright orange, at least in part, either on their body or their reproductive structures. And so any bright orange or orange yellowish lichen, your first guess can be that they're in the sunburst lichen family, and then you're usually right.
And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The sunburst lichens are really diverse. They take just about every shape that lichens can. The main shapes that lichens come in are bushy, so they look like little shrubs. They have like 3-dimensional growth. They're lifting off the substrate. And these sunburst lichens are bright orange, so they're like tiny little bright orange bushes, usually hanging out on tree branches is where I see those most often. So you got the bushy kind. The science word is fruticose, but you don't need to remember that. So you got the bushy kind, and then there's the leafy kind of sunburst lichen. And leafy means it's got a little bit of thickness, and it usually sits on top of the thing they're growing on, usually rocks or trees, sometimes even metal. And so those leafy lichens are orange, and sometimes they make little cups on them, but they're pretty distinctive too. So we got sunburst lichens in bushy form, leafy form, and then the last form is called crusty. They form like a tiny thin crust on like usually rocks, sometimes trees. And they almost look like they're spray painted on. So they're smooth with the surface. So those are the 3 main shapes or forms that the sunburst lichen will come in: bushy, leafy, and crusty.
So could be hard to identify with
Yes.
multiple different options. So you really want to rely on that color.
That's one of the things that I rely on as a lichen identifier. The first 2 things that I'll look at before then is, where is it growing? I said that the sunburst lichens will grow on trees and rocks and metal. The main groups for where lichens grow are trees, rocks, and soil. They'll grow right on the dirt or like kind of a humus layer. So that's one of the things, the habitat, where are they growing? Trees, rocks, or soil. And then their shape. Are they bushy, leafy, or crusty? And then the color. So those are the 3 phases that I'll use to look at any lichen. Where's it growing? what's its shape, what's its color. Then after that, you look at some specific lichen structures.
How many different varieties of the sunburst lichen are there across the globe? And how many of those are found here in the Midwest?
The Telocistaceae family, sorry, the sunburst lichen family have over 250 species, over 100 different genera around the world. So there's a lot of them, is like a short way to say it. Um, and and I think they're like the top five most species rich families. I might have to double check that, but I know they're up there. Um, in our area, the Midwest, there's over 40 species, 40 to 60 species of sunburst lichen.
So we've discussed that the lichens are found on trees, rocks, sometimes right on the soil.
hmm
What sort of environments can we find the sunburst lichens? And why do they like those areas? Like, are they in a forest, in a wetland? What sort of
Mm-hmm.
ecological environment can they be found?
So the cool thing about sunburst lichens is, put simply, they're everywhere. They're
Sweet.
in urban areas. They'll grow on like sidewalks. They will also be in what we would term wilderness areas, way out in the trees, old growth forest kinds of things. And they'll be everywhere in between. I find them in my neighborhood. They grow in the alley behind my house in Minneapolis. So they can tolerate a lot of like urban environments, which makes them kind of unique. Sometimes the pollution from urban environments will kill or harm lichens, but the sunburst lichens are extra tough against pollution and nitrogen specifically. So they're resistant to that. They grow in places that other lichens might not grow.
Interesting. So, what do they need to survive? Us as humans need food, air, water to survive. What does a lichen need to
Yeah,
live?
pretty similar. Realistically, the lichen food is the sunlight. The algae in the lichen does photosynthesis like plants do. And so it eats up that sunlight and carbon dioxide and water and poops out sugar and oxygen. And that sugar and oxygen, in the case of the lichen, goes right to the fungus. The fungus eats up that sugar and oxygen and uses that to grow and get bigger and make the lichen bigger. So they're a symbiotic relationship since they interact with each other and they're mutualistic. They both benefit.
That leads us to my next question. So, are they beneficial to the trees that they grow on, or is that harmful to the trees?
From what I understand, the lichens don't really do much to the trees. They don't really help them. They don't really hurt them. Um, Trees with a lot of lichens don't really have like more advantage out in the world for their next tree generation. So they're pretty non-impacting. But the question does come up a lot, especially if a tree loses all of its leaves or gets sick. You might suddenly see it covered in lichens, whereas before they were kind of hidden. And so the question comes up to me all the time is, did the lichens kill my tree? And the answer is always no. Lichens have never killed your tree.
What, if anything, do lichens need to protect themselves? So, how do they defend themselves from any predators or environmental conditions?
So their main concern is not getting eaten and not getting hurt by the sunlight. So in order to stop lichens from being munched on by animals and insects and mammals, they taste really bad. Humans can sometimes use them for pharmaceuticals or dye making, and so people take lichens as medicine to help them feel better and recover. They can also be used as food. So they don't always discourage all of the people eating them. Sometimes humans get around it and use them to our advantage.
So, we talked about they don't want to get eaten, but you said the sun can also damage lichens. Tell us a little bit more about that and how they protect themselves or what they do to reduce that impact.
Definitely. So lichens, like humans, can get sunburnt or damaged by the sun. So you spend too much time in the sun on a hot July day, you're going to get crisped up. The same thing happens to lichens when they get a lot of sun. So since the lichens can't put on sunscreen that they buy from the drugstore, they have to make their own. And the sunburst lichens do it some of the best out of anybody. The sunburst lichens we said earlier are orange, at least somewhere in their body or reproductive structures. That orange color is from a class of compounds called anthraquinones. And so anthraquinones basically work like sunscreen. They absorb the harsh UV light that would give them and us a sunburn, and then it reflects it back out so that the delicate parts on the inside of the lichen don't get mutated or radioactive damage from the UV light. There's some lichens that make melanin, just like humans make melanin in their skin to help protect them from the sun. And lichens are smart too. So if there's a lichen that's in a shady spot, it's probably not going to waste all this effort making sunscreen. But say a branch comes down and then things get more sunny for them, the lichen can sense that and start making more sunscreen, making more orange pigment or more melanin so that they don't get sunburnt. So lichens are smart and responsive to their environment too.
Do they have brains?
They do not have brains,
Okay.
but they have sensing mechanisms. They can detect sunlight and water, gravity too, I'm pretty sure.
And sunburst lichens have traveled to outer space. Why and what was learned from that
Yeah,
experience?
spacefaring lichens. Why bother? So they sent the sunburst lichen and a yellow map lichen, two kind of crusty lichens that hang out on rocks in a lot of sunlight. They sent them up into space for 16 days, so just over 2 weeks. That's kind of like a proof of concept to see if these hardy lichens can do something that almost no other organisms on Earth can do, is survive the vacuum of space. So it's really cold and there's no air pressure. And you also get hit with a ton of radiation from all the stars around us. And so if humans did that, we'd be like dead within 30 seconds or a minute. And these lichens are so hardy and impressive, they can do it for 2 weeks. And then they
Wow.
did a follow-up study and they left them out for a year and they brought it back and it was able to be, not all of it was alive, but is able to reconstitute and keep growing again.
Huh.
And so that like shows that they're really hardy and resistant against space. And then you're like, all right, Tanner, that's cool. Lichens can get blasted with radiation like the Hulk and then they come back. I don't understand why that matters. So one of one of the things traveling in outer space is hard. There's a lot of radiation, there's a lot of junk flying around. And one of the things is like feeding yourself and staying protected from radiation. So if they can find organisms that can handle all that radiation and keep living and growing, maybe that could have impacts on how we protect ourselves from radiation or what kind of organisms we bring with to make ourselves food. Since you can't just go to the grocery store, you got to bring everything with you. And if you can't bring everything, then maybe you can grow your own in space, like hydroponics or something else.
So let's come back down to Earth.
For sure.
And how do sunburst lichens contribute to the broader ecosystem here on our planet?
Sunburst lichens, in particular, are important for ecology and something we call succession. So, succession is when species change over time from no species at all. If you think of like a lava field, a volcano erupts and then it oozes lava. There's obviously nothing living on it. How does that go from living to a forest down the line? And usually lichens are that first step. Lichens are the first thing to recolonize a disturbed area. So a lava flow, sometimes like a really harsh forest fire. Lichens are able to tolerate that really tough environment. And the sunburst lichens especially, since they can handle all that extra sunlight with their sunscreen, and they can even tolerate nitrogen and like bird poop. So you'll see roosting bird colonies covered in orange on the rocks. And that's from the sunburst lichens being happy and handling that. So they help create a complexity and they can lead to more species down the line coming in through succession.
They're like the first stepping stone to creating a healthy environment.
Exactly. Yes, that's 100% it.
Cool. What is a good reason why we should care about them? No, they help create a stronger environment for trees and for grass. How could they help our communities?
Lichens can tell us a lot about the air quality in the places that we live. So if you live in an area that has a lot of industry or there's a lot of cars, all that combustion, all that pollution makes it hard for lichens to live. And so there's going to be fewer lichens in a place with more pollution. And so scientists like Professor Daniel Stanton at the University of Minnesota, is using that information to figure out which lichens are where, and due to who's living where, that tells us what kind of pollution is in the environment.
So we've been talking about the sunburst lichen today, but you have spent a lot of time looking at lichens in Minnesota, and you have helped create a book on identifying lichens in Minnesota.
I
Tell
did,
us a little
yeah.
bit more about that, and where can people find it if they would like to start lichen searching?
Yeah, absolutely happy to talk about it. So last year in January 2025, I published the Minnesota Lichen Guide. I did all the technical writing and I did all the photos. And I had a graphic designer that I worked with, Karen Kopaz, who did a great job, an amazing job. And so I published the Minnesota Lichen Guide. It's available online for free. But you can also purchase physical copies. It started out as a volunteer project for a little lichen symposium educational effort, and so I've donated all those hours, and so I wanted to keep that spirit alive by making it
Oh,
publicly
cool.
available. Um, I have a link tree, Tanner Fungus. I also have a website, Midwest Mycologist. .com. You can buy the book. You can buy the book through that website, or also find the online free copy if you're looking to just dabble or you're a little curious. And it is the Minnesota Lichen Guide, but realistically, it works for every state in the Midwest. Most of what you're looking at is going to be in there.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
So as a helpful resource, I wrote about 32 genera, which is about, I think it's like 60 or 70 species, and they're the most common ones. And there is a second edition in the works, hopefully by the
Oh,
fall, bigger and better. So we'll see.
sweet. That is good news. Keep your eyes open, everybody. Well, anything else about the sunburst lichens that we haven't covered yet that you would like to dabble in and tell us more about?
Yeah, so I guess one last thing, another way that people use lichens, I mentioned a few, but lichens can be used for dye making, food, and medicine. Many of the lichens can be used for dye making, and it's a relatively underappreciated field. It used to be really big. Many Scottish tartan patterns were originally made from lichens before synthetic dyes were invented. Lichens are consumed for food if folks are familiar with the base spice in Indian cooking, garam masala, that uses lichens in part. They give kind of like an earthy, savory flavor.
Mm.
But lichens grow really slow, and so I don't generally recommend collecting and harvesting them. There's a lot of ethical considerations of when you rip one lichen off a rock, how long does it take to grow another one in that same spot? And it's usually a couple decades. So
No way. A couple decades?
people are recommended to collect windfall lichen. So after a storm, winds will knock lichen down onto the ground, and then it's generally fine from like an ethical standpoint. That lichen has run its course. Eventually, the lichen on the ground, knocked off from the tree, will die. So,
Okay.
uh,
That's a good thing to know. We want to take care of everything while we're enjoying it.
yes, absolutely, ethical use for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate being on here and getting to talk about one of my favorite passions.
For more information about our wild backyard or to access previous episodes, visit www.ourwildbackyard.org. Until next time, take care and enjoy nature in your neighborhood.